The world may be taking a weekend off, but the war continues. This cannot be ignored. America's silence, the silence of others in the world, only encourages Vladimir Putin. Pretty powerful words there from Ukrainian President Zelensky following one of the largest missile and drone attacks carried out by Russia into Ukraine overnight. Now, what we know so far as of this recording is that at least 12 people were killed, including 3 children, and more than 60 were injured as missiles and drones rained down all across Ukraine, far from the front, mind you. Now, just the attack last night, our understanding is that 60 KH version cruise missiles were used, as well as 9 Iskander ballistic missiles and 300 Shahed-style drones, the Shahed or Garand-style drones. Ukraine says that they were able to shoot down 47 of those cruise missiles and 266 Shahed, shot down and or crashed somewhere away from population centers. So just looking at those numbers, you expect that there's going to be pretty significant damage to the targets in Ukraine or the areas near the targets, and that's what we're seeing today in pictures and videos coming out from Kyiv, nonetheless, the capital of Ukraine, where quite a few civilian structures appear to have been hit. Now, 47 cruise missiles out of 60 means at least 13 of those got through. It sounds like, unless I've missed this piece of reporting, it sounds like all of the ballistic missiles made it through, and then only about 34 of the drones successfully made it through. That number is not all that surprising. Of all of these different munitions, the Shaheds are the slowest, the least maneuverable, the easiest to shoot down, and the only really ones in this grouping that can be shot down pretty successfully with limited technology. I mean, 50 caliber machine guns, AKs even, on the back of pickup trucks are able to effectively destroy those drones, and Ukraine has had a lot of experience doing it so far. Now, this doesn't come in a vacuum. Just the night prior, the 24th, Russia also launched an attack, including 14 Iskander ballistic missiles and 250 Shahed drones. Of those, 6 of the 9 ballistic missiles were shot down, and 245 of the 250 Shaheds were successfully intercepted or jammed or crashed or were decoys. There are actually quite a few decoys being included in these launches as of late. Now, Russia's point of view from all of this, real quick, is they say that last night the armed forces of the Russian Federation carried out a massive strike by high-precision sea, air, ground-based weapons and unmanned aerial vehicles on the Ukrainian defense industry enterprises, delivering components for missiles, electronics, explosives, missile fuel, and strike unmanned aerial vehicles to the armed forces of Ukraine, and radio technical reconnaissance satellite communication centers. They say the goals of the strike were achieved and the assigned targets were engaged. Now, as has been the normal and as is expected here, Ukraine is not going to publish the battle damage assessment from any military infrastructure that was hit in this strike. So I think we try to walk this line as best we can in this reporting. It's rarely entirely black and white. It's usually gray. I would expect that there was some degree of military infrastructure targeted yesterday by Russia, just because it's a complete waste to exclusively go after civilians in this kind of conflict. That doesn't mean that there were not also civilian infrastructure that was targeted in this strike, or maybe was nearby some of these military facilities. And of course, it's hard to result in the killing of children, the 3 children named last night, if you're exclusively going after military facilities. Now, something I want to talk about in this context is I feel like it's very easy to look past the first responders, maybe more so in a war zone than it is anywhere else. Like, we'll play some of the videos and the pictures showing just the exhaustion on these men and women, and kind of they're getting beat down, and understandably so. And I think, and I'm guilty of this as well, in a war zone, we tend to look at the war fighters, right? And maybe the non-combatants in that sense are the medics, and the people helping moving supplies to and from the front, things like that. First responders in this situation, I would argue, may face a heavier emotional toll than even the soldiers. The reason I say that is there's something in your mind, for better or for worse, when you are in a combat zone, in a combat situation, you have a uniform on and you're engaged in combat operations, where you understand that you and the people next to you could be killed at any moment. That doesn't exist further from the front. Now, I've never lived in a place like Kyiv that's under constant bombardment like this, or Gaza, for instance, over the last few years. So maybe that has changed, but these first responders are not engaged in combat day in and day out. So when they move into some of this wreckage, they're sifting through children's belongings, through somebody's kitchen. They were in the process of making dinner when these missiles and bombs fell. And when they find the people that they're pulling out from the rubble, whether they're alive or dead, they're civilians. And that weighs on you. I think that takes a much heavier toll than we recognize. So I don't know, maybe we should do a fundraiser at some point for some of these first responders, because they don't get a lot of the attention. They're working incredibly hard day in and day out to save anyone on the receiving end of these strikes. And again, just want to put up some of the pictures here showing you can just see the pain and the exhaustion in their eyes. It's nonstop. Now, again, President Zelensky spoke to this earlier today where he said, quote, "Each such terrorist Russian strike is a sufficient reason for new sanctions against Russia. Russia is dragging out this war and killing every day. The world may be taking a weekend off, but the war continues. Regardless of weekends or weekdays, this cannot be ignored. America's silence, the silence of others in the world, only encourages Putin." And the American silence here is notable. I mean, it was a month ago, seems like a lifetime ago, that President Trump sent out a statement saying, "Vladimir, stop. Stop attacking Ukraine. We're trying to reach some sort of peaceful settlement." But at this point, that's kind of the most we're getting out of the United States as it relates to this conflict. By and large, when you look at statements from senior officials throughout the United States, this series of attacks, this increase in attacks, and what we'll get to here in a moment, an increase in the pace of ground operations, taking more Ukrainian territory, it's just not in the top 10, top 20. It's not making it into any of these briefings here in the United States. Now, before we shift over to where there's been a little bit of progress, actually, possibly on the ceasefire front, I do want to mention we've got a podcast that I've been running every week with a friend of mine, Ben Wheeler. It's called Unclassified. I'll link it in the description below. It's on YouTube, Spotify, Apple. We're actually growing quite a bit. We've got like over 100 reviews on Spotify, which is pretty cool at this point. We just locked in our travel for the NATO summit, so we'll be heading overseas to attend that in a couple weeks here. And the goal is to do a couple episodes while we're there. Of course, a lot of that is going to be focused on the war in Ukraine. So if you want to, I'll promote it again as well while we're there. But if interested, all the links are below. Once a week, we go for about an hour, and we're working on incorporating more and more interviews going forward as well. But nonetheless, shifting back to some updates here in Ukraine, there was a prisoner exchange, the largest prisoner exchange that's taken place so far in this war, that did kind of lead to some ideas that maybe peace talks could progress. Now, this is reported by The Guardian, where they say Ukraine and Russia have completed a 1,000 for 1,000 prisoner swap after 3 days of exchanges amid heavy Russian airstrikes on Ukrainian cities. Ukrainian President Zelensky said on Sunday that the final 303 Ukrainian captives scheduled to be released had returned home from Russia in the final stage of the largest ever swap between the two warring countries. The Russian Ministry of Defense put out a statement saying, quote, "In accordance with the Russian-Ukrainian agreements reached in Istanbul on May 16th, the Russian and Ukrainian sides have agreed over the weekend and carried out the exchange of 1,000 people for 1,000 people." And Ukrainian GUR said, quote, "The liberated defenders will receive all necessary medical care and rehabilitation, as well as all due payments of monetary support for the time spent in captivity and one-time material assistance. Ukraine will ensure the reintegration of the liberated into society after prolonged isolation in Russian captivity." And we got some videos here that I think are pretty powerful, right? See these people that didn't know if they were ever going to make it home, ever going to be able to see their loved ones again, and don't know how many of their fellow soldiers, their friends and family members, didn't even know they were still alive. And we did actually see some footage as well of Ukrainian civilians kind of swarming these prisoners as they were coming home, yelling out the names of their friends and loved ones, saying like, do you know where they are? Have you heard anything of them? And it just gives you an idea of the toll, the mental and emotional toll it would take when you have a loved one in captivity and you have no idea their status, right? You don't know if they're dead or alive, and you're kind of hoping in a weird way that they're actually captured, because that means that they're still with us and could come home in the future. So we saw that playing out yesterday as well. Now, so this prisoner exchange was, of course, a step in the right direction. We've seen these from time to time, maybe suggesting that peace talks could actually progress. But over and again, it's one step forward and then like 17 steps backwards. So since then, just in the last couple days, we've had Russia say, actually, we're not going to be able to negotiate at the Vatican, which is kind of a wild statement. Putin's talked about expanding a buffer zone. There's been reports of a new Russian offensive kicking off in Kharkiv, and they have seized additional Russian territory in the northeast. So that's your yes, prisoner exchange, also increase in Russian military operations and strikes against Ukrainian cities. In terms of the peace talks, Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov said Russia has no plans for when or where the next meeting between Ukrainian and Russian representatives will occur. Since that report came out, it sounds like they're looking at Turkey again, possibly. But if you remember, President Trump earlier this week said, hey, we think the Vatican would serve as a great spot. And the new Pope came out and said, I'd be happy to serve as a mediator here to find some way to negotiate a peace settlement. And it looked like the United States was going to take him up on that and be like, hey, great, you do it. We're out of here. And Russia said, quote, efforts should not be wasted on unrealistic options. Imagine the Vatican as a venue for negotiations. It's a bit vulgar. The Vatican's vulgar. Lavrov linked the issue to religion, noting that a meeting of representatives from two Orthodox countries on a Catholic platform would be somewhat uncomfortable for the Vatican. I mean, I feel like if the Vatican has said we're willing to do this, maybe Lavrov shouldn't be layering on like, yeah, listen, that's going to be bad for you guys. It just, again, it seems like every time something moves in the right direction, Russia finds a way to stomp it out. Imagine saying that the Vatican isn't good enough with the Pope, is not a good enough situation to help bring about a negotiated settlement. It's almost as if, and we'll get into this DIA assessment here in a minute, it's almost as if Putin doesn't actually want to negotiate into this war. What are the odds? Shocking, I know. Now, continuing on with Russian actions in recent days, Putin put out a statement saying that a decision has been made to create a security buffer zone along the border between Russia and Ukraine. We've got an idea of where this might look like, or what this might look like. It would cover areas like Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod in the northeastern portion of the country. And we talked about this in a recent video where they've kind of dabbled with this in the past in the Kharkiv region, and they might be heading back into Kharkiv here soon. But a buffer zone is not going to do much in terms of stopping Ukrainian drone attacks into Russia. I mean, we've got some graphics here showing the Ukrainian drone strikes last night. I didn't mention it earlier in the video because we don't really have any footage of the effectiveness of these strikes quite yet. Not even much from Russia in terms of shooting them down. It's kind of like a black hole, strangely. But Ukraine is launching these from all over the country. And if you start taking 5, 10, 15 kilometers of territory along the border, that's not moving Russian targets out of range. So when I hear buffer zone, my thought generally is they're just trying to take more Ukrainian territory. It's probably the best way to look at it. But nonetheless, Putin said that this buffer zone is in the works. It's been approved. And when we look at a map, actually, pulling up Deep State map here, you'll see that in the Sumy region, it does look like Russia has solidified some of their gains just across the border from Kursk. This changed in recent days. This was an area that had been contested since Ukrainian forces had been pushed out of Kursk, and that was the area here up towards Sudza. Following that Russian counterattack is probably the best way to put it, pushing Ukraine out. We did see Russia push across the border into Ukraine in some areas, and we actually got some more footage in recent days showing the kind of continued pressure by Russia into Sumy. And even coming from Ukrainian channels today, it sounds like Russia has somewhat established more of a foothold in this area, which could be indicative. A couple ways to look at that. One, they're just taking advantage of momentum. This is the attack, counterattack concept throughout military history. They could be doing that. This also could be viewed as phase one, possibly, of this buffer zone type move that Putin is talking about. In line with that, we're starting to see some reports in recent days that Russia is planning to launch a new attack near Kharkiv. Now, there's been a couple different reports coming from Ukraine and international media saying that Russia is building up forces across the border to include the VDV, the airborne, and the naval infantry, which would be some of their more elite units, if you will, suggesting they might be trying to make a move on Kharkiv, which I believe is the second largest city, second most populated city in Ukraine. And this was a major issue about a year ago. It was last May when Russia first moved into, or not first moved in. They, of course, got pushed out of Kharkiv back in 2022. But last May, Putin was also talking about a buffer zone, and he moved troops into Kharkiv, and they took these little areas here near Vovchansk. And there has been talk of increased fighting in those areas in recent days. Nothing crazy, not all that out of the ordinary, and we're not getting a lot from Russian sources right now. And I should note that the buildup of VDV or naval infantry has not been confirmed by any other intel sources. So possible, wouldn't be shocking to see Russia make a move on Kharkiv, want to put that city under artillery fire. It would change the dynamic of the war quite a bit. But as of now, I would put the Kharkiv offensive in the rumor category. Doesn't mean that it's not going to happen, but what we've seen so far is just speculation without any concrete evidence. Now, I did want to bring up this DIA assessment that just came out a couple days ago. This is Defense Intelligence Agency, the intelligence apparatus for the Pentagon or U.S. DoD. And they just put this out. They say the intel is as of May 11th, 2025, and I believe they just made it public in the last 2 or 3 days. Nonetheless, they have a section in here on Russia, and there are a couple pieces I wanted to call out that I thought were interesting, to include the DIA's casualty assessment. They say Russian President Vladimir Putin regards the war in Ukraine as an existential struggle against the West that will determine Russia's place in the world, Putin's hold on power, and his historical legacy. So again, think of that. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with everyone here that's generally staying up to date with the war, but think about it. This is the U.S. government, one of our largest intelligence agencies that shares resources with a lot of other intel agencies. They're looking at this and saying, Putin's plan here, this is an existential struggle with the West. That's not something you're going to hash out over coffee at the negotiating table. It's determining his place in the world, Putin's hold on power, and his historical legacy. Those are not things that are easily walked away from. Again, kind of hammering home the idea that a peace deal anytime soon is probably not necessarily in the cards. And they hit on that. They say, in the absence of a negotiated settlement, or alternatively, robust Western aid, the battlefield outlook probably will continue to slowly trend in Russia's favor through 2025, though Russian battlefield gains are slowing and continue to come at the expense of high personnel and equipment losses. We've talked about this in recent videos. Just about everywhere along the front, we are not seeing Ukraine recapture territory. That's not really the situation they're in right now. It's not really what's best for their military. They're building up a drone wall, like we saw in yesterday's video, to try to heavily attrit Russian forces and make every single meter they take more and more costly, with the idea that they have a better chance of staying in the fight long term on the defensive. So nonetheless, we are seeing a continued trend of Russia taking territory and striking deeper and deeper into Ukraine. The DIA, in terms of losses, they say Russia has lost nearly 10,000 ground combat vehicles, including more than 3,000 tanks and nearly 250 aircraft and helicopters and more than 10 naval vessels. They add that Russia's ground forces have probably suffered more than 170,000 fatalities since the war began. So we'll help parse that one a little bit. Earlier on, they said 700,000 losses, troops injured, wounded. But here's the thing with casualties. Somebody can get wounded, and then they can go through rehab, and then go back to the front. All right, so casualties doesn't necessarily mean that those people are out of the fight. They might just be out of the fight temporarily. Fatalities are out of the fight. That's dead. Those are Russians that have been killed. So the Defense Intelligence Agency of the United States says that Russia has likely suffered more than 170,000 dead since the war began. Those are pretty high numbers. They say, although Putin and his military leaders probably would prefer more rapid battlefield gains, Moscow seems comfortable with the current cost of its slow advances, calculating they can steadily drain Ukraine's resources and will, and outlast the West's support for Ukraine. The reason I thought this was important is when we're talking about the possibility of a ceasefire, there's a couple different ways that we're seeing, or an end to this war is probably the best way to put it. There's a couple different scenarios that are playing out, and I think the most likely right now is that Putin is just dragging us along, hoping that Western support falls off. A fracture in the alliance, right? It's going to be easier to take on Ukraine by themselves. Next easier would be taking on Ukraine with just some Western European support. And then the hardest is taking on Ukraine with a unified block of support from the United States, Western Europe, and other allies around the country. If Russia can sever that at all, fracture any of that support even a little bit, it helps their cause. I believe that's what we're seeing with the dragging out of negotiations, the squabbling of now the Vatican is not an appropriate venue, get out of here. And that's the DIA's assessment as well. If that probably what Putin and his leadership are trying to do right now is to drain Ukraine's resources and will, and outlast the West's support for Ukraine. I'll go ahead and link that DIA assessment in the description below if you want to give it a read. It's a little bit dry, but they also have some sections about North Korea, Iran, China, terrorism, other things, border security and cartels, things like that, if interested. But nonetheless, that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.